Hello everyone, welcome to the help video for quiz 1.03. Alright, so let's start off with our need to know info. Again, similar triangles, we talked about this in the last help video, but it's triangles whose corresponding angles are equal and their corresponding side lengths are proportional. And make sure when you set up a proportion that you cross multiply to solve. So we're going to use this fact that they're proportional on this quiz. Here we go. The first one says the triangles are similar. What is the value of x? Well, you can do this two ways. I'm going to go ahead and show you the proportions because that way always works, but I'll show you another way as well. So I want to find x. So I'm going to start off by putting x on top of my fraction, and then I'm going to pick any other side from this triangle. So I'm just going to go ahead and use 12. And now when I set it equal, when I set it proportional, it has to be to the corresponding sides. So notice that x corresponds to 4, and 12 corresponds to 3. And then from here, now that I've set up my proportion, I can cross multiply to solve. So x times 3 is 3x. 12 times 4 is 48. Divide each side by 3. And x will equal 16. Now you could have noticed, or a lot of you probably noticed, that you could have also used scale factor here. Think about this. To get from 12 to 3, or let me go in the other way. To get from 3 to 12, we're multiplying by 4. Now we need to make sure that works for all the sides, but if we check 5, to get from 5 to 20, again, we're multiplying by 4. So this bigger triangle is 4 times bigger than the smaller triangle. So you could have used the scale factor to say, okay, to get from 4 to the next number, I have to multiply by 4. And 4 times 4 is 16. So you can either set up your proportions or you can use scale factor. The reason I'm going to do proportions every time is because sometimes you get ugly things like this, and it's a little bit harder to use scale factor, although some of you will be great at scale factor. So you do you. If you like scale factor better, go for it. I'm going to go ahead and set up proportions. So since I'm trying to find the value of x, I'm going to need to make sure that I start off by putting that in my first fraction. So 6x plus 28. And then I can pick any other side from this triangle. I'm going to use the smaller number, so I'm also going to use 28. And then when I set that equal, I just have to make sure I get corresponding sides. Since 6x plus 28 was the hypotenuse, I need to make sure that the hypotenuse of this triangle goes on top. And since this was the bottom, I need to make sure the bottom goes on bottom. And then from here, we can cross multiply. Now this cross multiplying is a little bit tricky right here because you have to make sure that you multiply 7 by each of these pieces. So I'm going to write it out like this. I want to multiply 7 by the 6x and the 28. So I'm going to put that in parentheses. And then I also need to cross multiply this way. I need to do 28 times 25. Okay, so we need to distribute that 7, and that's a step that a lot of you will miss, so don't be that person. Make sure you get this right. We need to do 7 times 6x, and we need to do 7 times 28. We have to multiply it by both pieces. And then over here, we can just multiply 28 times 25. And then we've got ourselves an equation to solve. We're trying to solve for x, so I need to get rid of 196. Right now it's adding, so the opposite operation would be to subtract 196 from each side. I'm going to bring that 42x straight down, and then I'm going to subtract. And then I can divide each side by 42. And I got the x equals 12. Okay, so there we go. I was going to show you how we can do it with scale factor as well, but I think I'm going to go ahead and go to the next question for time's sake. All right, this one doesn't say solve for x. This one says, what is AE? So I'm going to go ahead and highlight that to remind myself that I need to go back and figure out the length of AE. Okay, now this looks a little bit crazy here, but we actually have two similar triangles. We have this triangle, and we have this triangle. And the reason we know they're similar is because 10 and 4, those two segments are parallel. So we know that the alternate, hang on. Sorry about that, y'all. I got a phone call right in the middle of the recording, which is totally awkward. But I think where I left off is I was saying because these two lengths are parallel, the alternate interior angles have to be the same. And we also know vertical angles have to be the same. So we have enough to prove that these are similar based on the angle-angle similarity postulate. So because they're similar, we can set up their sides proportionally. So I'm going to go ahead and take 2x plus 10 from the first triangle and 10 from the first triangle, since those are my only two sides. And then I just have to make sure I get the corresponding sides. Notice 10 is going to correspond to 4, so I want to make sure I put that on the bottom. And then 2x plus 10 is going to correspond to x plus 3. And now we have some cross multiplying to do. I like this problem because you have to remember to distribute. You got to multiply that 4 by each of those pieces. So you got to do the 4 times the 2x, and you have to do the 4 times the 10. And then we'll cross multiply this way, and again, we have to multiply that 10 by both of those pieces. So we're going to have to do the 10 times x and the 10 times 3. Don't forget to do that. That's a really common mistake. Make sure, a lot of people will put 8x plus 10 down here, and that's not correct. You got to multiply the 4 times each of them. All right, now we're solving equations. I have x's on both sides. I want to get them on the same side. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 10x from each side. That would cancel that one. And I would get a negative 2x. Drop this right down. Drop that straight down. Since I'm trying to get this x by itself, I need to get rid of plus 40. And the opposite of adding 40 is subtracting 40. I'm going to come over here because I'm out of room. And then we got to get rid of the negative 2. Right now it's negative 2 times x. The opposite of multiplying is dividing. So x equals 5. Don't put that as your answer. The question does not say solve for x. The question says, what is the length of AE? So don't put 5 as your answer. Let's go back and plug it in to figure out our answer. So since I'm trying to find AE, I need to substitute 5 in. 2 times 5 is 10, and 10 plus 10 is 20. So the length of AE is 20 units long. All right, Hayes builds model sailboats as a hobby. The dimensions of the sailboats are given. What is the height x of the smaller sailboat's sail? I sounded really country. Sail. Enter your answer as a decimal in the box. Okay, so these are actually similar triangles. Even though the question doesn't say that they're similar triangles, notice we have a right angle and another angle. So we can prove they're similar based off that angle-angle similarity postulate. And because we know they're similar, then we can set up proportions. I always like to start with x. So I'm going to do x over 7. And then I just got to make sure I get corresponding sides. The x corresponds to 12, and the 7 corresponds to 8. And then we got some cross multiplying to do. 8 times x is 8x. I should really know this in my head, but I don't. 7 times 12 is 84. Jeez. And then you could divide each side by 8. And I got that x equals 10.5. Now some of you, when you see a decimal, you freak out. You're like, oh no, I've done everything wrong. But notice here it says enter your answer as a decimal in the box. So that actually is the right answer. Don't freak out just because you get a decimal answer. All right, a man throws a basketball from 30 inches above the ground. The basketball bounces off the floor and the boy catches it. The distance the ball traveled from the man to the floor is 45 inches, and the distance the ball traveled from the floor to the boy is 40 inches. The angles formed from the basketball path are congruent. What is the distance x from the floor to the boy that caught the ball? Enter your answer as a decimal in the box and round your answer to the nearest 100th. Whew, that was a lot of reading. I'm tired just from reading that. But y'all, don't freak out when you see a ton of reading. Look, they even give us this pretty picture. And it tells us that the angles formed are congruent, so we know that these are similar because we have angle-angle similarity postulate. So then we can set up proportions. I always like to start off my first fraction with x. So I'm going to do x over 40 because those are the two values from this triangle. And then I'm going to set it equal to the corresponding values of this triangle. So since x was on top, I'm going to need 30 on top because those correspond. Since 40 was on bottom, I'll need 45 on bottom. And then we can cross multiply and solve. So x times 45 is 45x, and 40 times 30, let's make that easier. 4 times 3 is 12, and then we have 2 zeros, so I'm just going to plop those on the end. And if you didn't know that shortcut, you can always just multiply it in your calculator. And then we got to finish solving for x, so divide each side by 45. And x will equal, my calculator says 26.6 repeating. So let's go back and see what the answer wants. It wants it as a decimal, rounded to the nearest hundredth. Okay, so let's just do a quick rounding review. The hundredth is the second decimal place, because you have a decimal, and then you think about zeros. So 10 has 1 0. 100 has 2 zeros. 1,000 has 3 zeros. So if it says the hundredth, you ask yourself, okay, that's 2 zeros, so I know I want 2 decimal places. So I'm going to look at the one behind the second decimal place, and that 6 is going to make that round up to a 7. So my final answer here, and you got to make sure you round correctly, is going to be 26.67 inches. All right, y'all, good luck on the quiz.